In 1979, Fangoria burst onto the horror scene like a rebellious spit in the face for the traditional horror magazine. While it took a few issues to find its direction, Fangoria quickly found an audience with the teens who were into the new generation of gory, splattery horror. Dawn of the Dead, Friday the 13th, Maniac and zombie flesh eaters, rather than the classic horror that the black and white magazines that came before focused on. Fangoria was packed with full-colour, gory images, even on the front cover. It was like nothing that we'd seen before. Well, almost. In fact, 5 years earlier, a British magazine also wallowed in gore and did so in an even less respectable way than Fangoria would. Monster Mag thrived on shameless sensationalism and managed to outrage and thrill in equal measure. Not only did this feel like a welcome breath of fetid air in the horror magazine world, not only did it provide a steady supply of huge horror movie posters to plaster your bedroom with, but it also predicted the moral panic that would greet so-called video nasties in the early 1980s. Monster Mag was published by Top Sellers, a London-based company that produced a wide variety of magazines and comic books, from Cinema X and assorted top-shelf titles to Funny Half Hour and Pocket Chiller Library, of which more in a future video. The magazine was an early poster mag, with a mere 8 pages of actual content that then opened out into a huge pin-up poster, more often than not a bloody image from a Hammer film. "Open it out if you dare" was the mag's tagline. It was the poster that was the main selling point back when posters were still hugely popular. Not only did Monster Mag give you a poster that featured a photo from a Hammer horror movie, or maybe an Amicus one, but it also included features on horror movies, and did so for less than the price of a rolled poster bought in Woolworth. It was originally priced at 15p, with the final issue selling for twice that. Considerably costlier than a comic at the time, but essentially the same price that you might pay for a regular and usually black and white magazine. Launching in 1974, Monster Mag was originally edited by Roger Noel Cook, a somewhat legendary figure in the British publishing world whose career takes in everything from Doctor Who to Penthouse, Whizzer and Chips to Electric Blue. His fascinating career as a writer, publisher and rock star is a story in itself, and one that I hope to return to in a future documentary. After the first few issues, Cook's wife Jan took over as the official editor of the magazine, though it continued in exactly the same way, and arguably there was very little to really edit anyway. The articles that filled out the non-poster side of the magazine were lightweight pieces on horror films and TV shows, often little more than a synopsis that I suspect was lifted from a press book, and the emphasis was primarily on the imagery. And what imagery that was! Unlike most monster magazines of the time, usually American imports like Movie Monsters, Famous Monsters of Filmland and Quasimodo's Monster Magazine, Monster Mag was in full colour and placed an emphasis on the goriest images that the editors could find. These provocative images were often run with the flimsiest of excuses, with a vague article tying them together at best. Sometimes the magazine simply collected a bunch of gory stills together and cheerfully admitted to not even knowing which films they came from. This was clearly sensationalism without any socially redeeming qualities, and the idea that this was being marketed to kids invariably caused some outrage. Horror was seen as both unsuitable for and only of interest to children. A curious contradiction that would also feed into the assorted bouts of mass hysteria about video nasties, horror comics and video games. This pioneering exploitation spirit would get the mag into trouble almost immediately. Like many publications at the time, Monster Mag was printed overseas and imported back into the UK. Issue 2 fell foul of British customs, who seized and destroyed the whole run, making this issue one of the most sought after and unobtainable magazines of all time. You can now buy a reprinted edition if you're curious about what the outrage was, though you'll probably find it all rather tame. As a result of this seizure, Monster Mag then took to splashing "for sale to adults only" across the masthead, though how seriously this was actually taken was perhaps revealed by the article on horror makeup in issue 11, which suggests using some grey and red makeup borrowed from Mum. Well, I suppose that could still apply to some adult readers. Similarly, my memory of Monster Mag in the shops was that it was sold on the bottom shelf close to the comic, rather than in the out-of-reach adults-only top shelf. The warning perhaps placated the authorities. After all, the obscenity laws referred to those likely to see such material, and by allegedly restricting the sale to adults, the magazine could no longer be seen as aimed at children. What's more, the allegedly forbidden nature of the magazine acted as a selling point. Monster Mag was catnip for some school kids who would eagerly enjoy its gruesome delights in school cloakrooms and playgrounds whenever somebody had obtained a copy. Much like a purloined dirty magazine or hedge porn, Monster Mag became the forbidden fruit that kids would pore over in awed excitement, a mix of guilt and thrills seeing something that they shouldn't. The size of the magazine varied considerably during the initial run. The early issues were an oversized 24.5 by 33.5 centimeters, approximately, promising a poster that was over 2 feet by 3 feet on the cover. This was, by any standards, an impressive size and gave the otherwise flimsy magazine a sense of grandeur. This was the mid-70s though, where strikes, inflation, oil crises and other constraints meant that the price of raw materials would fluctuate wildly. Midway through the initial run, paper costs, according to the issue 11 editorial, saw the size drop to under A4 for a few issues, before increasing, but not quite back to the original size, again with future issues. The smaller editions feel very compromised, and the posters seem to lack impact. Magazine distribution in the 1970s was often a hit-and-miss affair. You might find one edition of Monster Mag in your local shop, but there would be no guarantee that the next month's issue would also be available. And like many a poster magazine, Monster Mag's sales would fluctuate depending on what the poster actually was. No one was really buying this for the articles. If the poster seemed lackluster, it was easy to save a bit of money or buy something else. The magazine was cancelled after issue 14, and that might well have been the end of it. But Monster Mag was revived in 1976 with British comics legend Dez Skinn at the helm, practising for the up-and-coming House of Hammer that launched shortly after this second run began. The 3 issues produced by Skinn, numbered as Volume 2 numbers 1 to 3, placed more emphasis on text with contributions from writers like John Brosnan and Barry Patterson among others, and so had a great deal more substance if a little less blood. Issue 2-2 also had a recreation of the original 1958 Dracula poster rather than a movie still. Arguably an improvement, at least for readers who had no access to buying actual movie posters at the time. On the downside, one of the 8 content pages was now being given over to an editorial and adverts for back issues. The final issue also has a full-page ad for the new House of Hammer, 2 pages of photos from Scars of Dracula, and a double poster. That is, 2 half-size images that had to be displayed together unless you wanted to cut the magazine in half. This is arguably the most disposable edition of Monster Mag, certainly the most disposable of the Skinn run, and it's clear that the focus was on the more traditionally formatted House of Hammer by this point. But the final issue of Monster Mag also tantalisingly advertised a Double X edition to be devoted to Euro horror. What did Double X mean? More gore, nudity, or both? Well, we would never know because this edition never appeared. In the mid-2010s, Skinn would finally publish this issue alongside several other new editions of Monster Mag, But how much this version resembled what was planned in 1976 is hard to say. While Dez Skinn's 2010s revival fed the nostalgia market, with cover prices and dates still pretending that it was the mid-70s even though the actual price per issue was now a more substantial £10, Monster Mag nevertheless feels like a relic of a past that is now long forgotten. The age of the poster magazine in general seems to have passed, and it's unlikely that a magazine like this would be published today. Even with the adults only disclaimer, it's likely that Monster Mag will be turned down by most retailers, and the magazine's sales market is now dominated by big players rather than the corner newsagents. Skinn's new version, notably, was only available through mail order. Still, this was revolutionary stuff at the time. With its coverage of the obscure, gory movies that other magazines ignored or condemned, Monster Mag was a seminal publication for the pre-video nasty generation of British horror fans that was growing up in the 1970s. It showed that there was a market for the lurid and the sensational, and that we didn't all want to read article after article about Karloff and Lugosi. It was of its time and would never have been able to compete with the glossy, gory magazines of the 1980s, which offered both gruesome imagery and substantial written content. But equally, it feels a shame that there's no longer a place for something like this. I assume that kids still like to plaster their rooms with posters, and that many of them are still obsessed with monsters. Maybe Monster Mag, or something a little like it but perhaps slightly less provocative, is long overdue a comeback. So, what did you think? Did you read Monster Mag at the time or discover it later? I found an almost complete run in a local shop during the mid-1980s, so I assume that copies hung around elsewhere for years as well. Did you enjoy it, or were you glad to see it replaced by House of Hammer and Fangoria? Let us know in the comments. As I said, there are so many connected stories to this one that need to be told. Roger Cook, Dez Skinn, Pocket Chiller Library, House of Hammer. And if you don't want to miss out on me doing so, make sure that you've subscribed to the Overlooked Hotel. And if you've enjoyed this video, I'd appreciate a like, a share, and maybe, dare I say, a more fiscal show of appreciation through our various fundraiser portals. Every little helps. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon.